share my story, give kind of a firsthand accounting of what it was like to actually experience 9/11 firsthand, up close and personal, and also what it's like in the last 19 years to be a 9/11 survivor. So I know it is not a feel-good topic, it is not a happy topic, and the fact that you're spending your night away from your family and away from hobbies to listen to me, as many times as I've done these types of things, and I've talked to as small as 2 people and as many as thousands, it warms my heart each and every time that people take the time. So to say that I'm grateful, and this is obviously an emotional week for me. So I try to keep it together, and I'm usually pretty good at that. But when I give talks on the 9/11 week, sometimes my voice cracks. So I apologize in advance if that happens. A little background about me. I'm originally from New York, in case the accent doesn't give it away. I now live in New Jersey. I do talk fast, but I try when I speak to slow it down a little bit. I have been lucky enough to visit the wonderful state of Iowa. I did healthcare consulting there for the Bureau Chief of Medicaid a few years back. And as I told Terry when I first spoke to her, I found the folks to be just wonderful and welcoming and great. And I'm so happy to be able to address folks from your great state. I wanted to start by just giving you an accounting of my day, as brief as I can. 9/11 was a regular sunny day. It was gorgeous. It was what the weathermen call severe clear, where there's not a cloud in the sky. And I worked for a healthcare company at the time called Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield. And it was a normal day. It was a Tuesday. And on Tuesdays, I had boring status meetings at 9 o'clock. And I was getting ready for my boring status meeting. And at 8:46, I heard a tremendous thud and a crash, and my building shook. And I was on the 29th floor of the North Tower. If you look at the Twin Towers, the North Tower is the one with the antenna. It's the one that was hit first and fell second. And back in 2001, we didn't have instant information like we do now. We didn't have iPads. We didn't have, phones that told us instantly what was happening. And the early reports were that a small plane, like a Cessna sightseeing plane, had hit the building. And one of the things that I always like to impress on folks when I tell my story is, I think we're all conditioned that in an emergency, there's going to be some sort of an authority figure telling us what to do and where to go. There's going to be an alarm, some guy with a megaphone, somebody pointing. In an actual emergency, in my experience, there's none of that. I was on a floor with regular executive office people like myself. We heard a tremendous, crazy sound. No one told us anything, and we just started walking to the stairs. Mm-hmm. People often ask me, why not the elevator? Why would you want to go down 29 flights of stairs? But I know, at least where I live, we're trained from the time we're little that in an emergency, mm-hmm. don't look for an elevator. So we went towards the stairs, and it was very orderly. It wasn't running or people going crazy. And I think that was a blessing because we didn't automatically know what was wrong. We thought it was an unfortunate accident. When I started down the stairs, every time I would go down a flight, the next stairwell would open, more people would be coming in. So there's this imagery of people like running down the stairs in herds, but there couldn't be any running because there was just too many people, just too high of a volume. And as we went down, everyone was orderly, helping each other. And then the firemen started to come up in all of their gear. Oops, a bug just went in my eye. I'm sorry. This is what happens when you have the window open in the summer here. Sorry. So as we're going down the stairs, the firemen are coming up. And again, we're thinking small accident, that's not that odd. About halfway down, the mood just turned, and more firemen are coming up and coming up. And for some reason, I asked one of them, what exactly happened? What hit this building? And he said, a jet. And those of us who were born and raised in New York, like me, we knew the flight patterns. Jets do not fly there. That does not happen. But again, it's 2001. It's before, world terrorism is rampant. So we're thinking an accident. Maybe some poor pilot had a heart attack, went off course. We knew it wasn't weather because, as I mentioned, it was very, very clear. But it was nerve-wracking. And as we went down the stairs, I smelled jet fuel, and water started pouring in the stairwell. I was wearing a dress and heels. It was a business day. I took my shoes off to avoid slipping and sliding and just kept going down the stairs. And when I got to the lobby, that's when I knew that something unimaginable must have happened. Because as I mentioned in the beginning of the journey, there was no one telling us what to do. In the lobby, it was Armageddon. Screaming, carrying on, pieces of glass. If anyone had ever been in the World Trade Center, or if not, if you can imagine like a grand hotel or a ballroom, marble, glass, all those kind of fixtures, everything just smashed beyond recognition, and people screaming. And first responders were grabbing us sort of in groups of 5 and 10 and pointing to exits and saying, you go here, you go there. Mm-hmm. I was gathered with about 5 other people, and the first responder we had said, go out that door, cross the street, and whatever you do, don't look up. And they just kept saying it, don't look up, don't look up. And I guess it's human nature. What do? You look up. Mm-hmm. And to say it's the stuff of nightmares, there's no amount of therapy or counseling that removes what you see. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the media in the beginning did show some of the more graphic images, which I know are very disturbing to everyone, as they should be. But the talks of people jumping and having the jumpers, I did see that. That did happen. You saw people high above. You saw pictures of people holding hands and jumping. And the sounds of that are just, I just have to hope that there is just instant, that there's no pain. I'm not a very religious person, but I have to hope that whatever power there is took that away. I had a stroke of luck when I first came out of the building. There was a Good Samaritan that lived in the neighborhood. Lower Manhattan had a lot of residential buildings. People think of it as this big concrete cold city, but people live there. And a woman who lived in the area gathered a bunch of us and said, hey, I live over here. You can use the phone, tell your families that you're out, kind of get your bearings. And I thought, great. In hindsight, it really wasn't a good idea. What I should have done is gotten as far away as possible. But even in the moment, even in all of the horror, no one there, no one, not the first responders, not the people, ever thought those buildings were going down. Once I got outside, people were screaming, it's terrorism, run. And when I did look up, I saw that both towers were on fire. I couldn't put together why. I kept hearing about airplanes, and then I'm thinking, could an airplane go through one tower and then the other? But that doesn't make any human sense. What could it be? People are screaming, there's 2 planes, the world's coming to an end. It was just insanity. So a bunch of us go to this woman's apartment. I put my shoes and my belongings in a back bedroom. My shoes were wet. I wasn't able to call my New York family because all of the cell towers were in my tower and gone. But the landlines, for some peculiar reason, I could call out of state. And at the time, my dad lived in Virginia. So I was able to call him, and then he was able to call other family members. And about 15 minutes into being in this woman's apartment, I heard this crazy alarm. And the resident of the apartment said, we have to evacuate. That's the evacuation sound. We didn't know why, but we ran down 5 flights of stairs. I didn't take any of the belongings, my shoes, everything I just left. We ran. We didn't know what we were running from or why. And as we're running, I'm hearing this sound that I can't replicate. And I've never seen a 9/11 documentary that really does it justice. It's like a freight train and a jet engine and, you know, the opening of the gates of hell all kind of rolled into one. Mm-hmm. And as I'm walking out the door of this apartment, it was like a blizzard. I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me. It was all swirling debris like the biggest snowstorm. And the ground looked like sand on the beach. I'm from Long Island, suburb of New York. I grew up by the beach. And it looked like I was on the beach. And I'm thinking, am I hallucinating? Am I dead? Am I losing my mind? Why is there sand on the ground? Why is there snow? Like, what is going on? And what I then found out was that was the South Tower going down. And what a lot of people don't know, it only took 11 seconds for each building to go down. People think that's a typo or it's a, exaggeration, but it literally took 11 seconds because the building went down like this. And when we heard people screaming, run, it's coming down, none of us are engineers. We're thinking it's coming like this towards us and that we're all going to just die. I saw first responders and I kept asking, like, which way should I go? I don't have a good sense of direction on a normal day ever. So I'm thinking, okay, that's what's going to kill me here. I'm going to run like right in the wrong direction. And the scary thing was, as a little kid, you think the policeman knows everything, right? The fireman knows everything. They just looked at you and said, I don't know what to tell you, because they were in the same boat. And I had this obsession that I wanted to run towards the Statue of Liberty, which is right near there in Lower Manhattan. But the Statue of Liberty is surrounded by water. I know there's ferries there. I know there's boats. And I'm thinking, if I can get there, if I can get to water, Manhattan is an island, I can get to be safety. Maybe I can swim. I don't know what sort of Olympian I thought I was, that I was going to swim to the Statue of Liberty, but seemed like a good idea at the time. And I decided I would go towards the water. So now we're running, hordes, masses of people running in every direction, shoeless, in all states of disrepair. And then I think, I can't breathe because I have asthma, and now I'm in all this swirling debris. And it's amazing how your life kicks into this survival mode. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not dying of an asthma attack. This is not how this is going to happen. But I had no belongings. I had no inhaler. I had left everything in this woman's apartment. But it's New York, and everyone's asthmatic in New York. So I yelled out into the crowd, hey, does anybody have an inhaler? As we're running, this is like a true story. As we're running, this woman, random stranger, throws me an inhaler. I take a couple puffs. I throw it back. Now other people are doing the same thing. This man next to me takes off his necktie. I still have this tie, the Jones New York necktie, gives it to me and like wraps it around my face so I have like a shield. And now it was like, I still get chills 19 years later. It was a chain reaction. Women are taking off scarves. I saw a woman take her slip off under her skirt, rip it into pieces to give to people. And now everyone's like making, it's crazy. Now everyone has a mask, right? But then no one had masks and everyone was helping everyone else. I finally, by some divine intervention, reached the water's edge. And I thought, okay, this seemed like a good idea, but there are no boats. I don't know what's going on. And now I hear that god-awful sound again. And now I know enough to know that that sound means another tower's coming down. And now I feel trapped because now I'm at the water's edge. So all of us that had reached this point decided that we were going to lay face down on the ground and kind of cover our heads and just wait. And you heard people praying. It's New York, so every nationality, every language, every religion, just crying, praying, holding hands with strangers, just hoping. And the sound eventually subsided and we were still here. Then people were clapping and screaming. And miraculously in the distance, I did see boats. And there's a great little thing you can see on YouTube that's narrated by Tom Hanks called Boat Lift. And it shows how people were rescued by boats on 9/11. And I was rescued by the New York Waterway Ferry, which happens to be a commuter. People take ferries from New York to New Jersey all the time. And we weren't at a dock. So the boats came, and like in every bad disaster movie, they actually said, women and children first. The men lined up, the women lined up, and the men helped hoist the women over the rail because we weren't at a normal boat dock. We were just at the side of a harbor, lowered us into these boats. We didn't even know where the boats were going. We didn't care, but we just knew we had to get off this island. Right before I got on the boat, we heard a tremendous sound of a plane coming. Now at this point, we knew that planes had done this. So everyone was losing their mind thinking another plane was coming. Then someone said, no, I can see that it's not a jet, it's some sort of a fighter like US, armed services. But we didn't know, maybe those were hijacked. So again, back on the ground we go, we lay down face down, and we don't know, are these planes coming to help us or hurt us? But thankfully, they were the good guys. I got on this ferry. I looked as I'm leaving the island. I see my beloved city is in flames. My buildings are gone. I'm wondering who lived, who died. It was just a surreal, when I see the pictures to this day, it's almost like a disconnection that I was there. It's a crazy, crazy feeling. And I was taken to Jersey City, which is right across the harbor, and they had ambulances waiting by. I had a lot of breathing difficulties, so I went to the hospital, was there until the end of the day, and then convinced them that I wanted to be discharged. I had a hospital closer to where I lived. Now, at this point, we have no belongings, no house keys, no shoes. My family's in New York. Tunnels and bridges are closed. I'm going through a divorce, and there's no way I'm asking my ex-husband to help me. Even at that point, I still have my pride. So I asked a friend to contact the apartment building I was working at, tell my landlord what happened, get an extra key, and he was there waiting for me and helped me. And then the next day, we got all kinds of keys and all sorts of things going. To say 9/11 was the worst day of my life, it definitely is up there in the top 5, but 9/12 was probably worse, because 9/12 is when you found out who lived and who didn't. Back then, again, before a very sophisticated internet, my company had a hotline. So on television, it would say, if you work for Empire Blue Cross and you can tell who's here, please call this number. And we would call each other in. And the first reports was that everyone from my company, which was about 2,500 people, had survived. And as wonderful as I thought that news was, the skeptic in me and seeing what I saw, I said, the odds are that can't possibly be true. And my boss at the time called me to see how I was doing. And I said, have you heard anything? He said, yeah, there's 11 people that are unaccounted for. And he was fairly new to the company. I had been there a long time. And I said, do you know who any of those 11 are? He said, you know, Wendy, I don't know the names. It didn't ring a bell. I said, Bob, think, just give me something here. Who? And he said, the only ones that come to mind that I can remember is there was a guy with a long last name that began with the letter Z, and he was with a man in a wheelchair. And at that moment, I said, I have to go now. And I put the phone down and I lowered my body to the kitchen floor and just started to weep, because one of my best friends at Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield was a guy with a long last name that began with the letter Z, who's best friends with a man in a wheelchair. And I knew instinctively that he would not have left him. And I also knew that if he was alive, his family would know. And I called his family, and they were in the process of creating those missing posters that you saw plastered all over town. And I hoped that maybe he had gotten, hit on the head and maybe just couldn't make contact and the cells were down. But you just know, we've all had that feeling of dread in our lives when we just know something bad. And I talked to his sister-in-law. I called the house and I said, what's happening? And she said, well, he called us and he said he was waiting with his friend Ed, BA, and they were waiting for the firemen to come. And then about 15 minutes later, he called us again and he said, good news, they're here, they're getting Ed situated. He was a quadriplegic, so he had a lot of equipment, a lot of things that accompanied him. And they were in the process of getting him down the stairs. And that is when my tower, the North Tower, collapsed. And Ed and Abe were on the 27th floor. I was on the 29th. And the part about Abe that I always want people to know is, as amazing as it is that he stayed with his friend, and that says so much about his character, he would have stayed with a stranger because that's who he was. Mm-hmm. That is just who he is as a being. And at the time, President Bush spoke of him, and they've named streets after him. And every time I talk about him, I hear his voice in my head saying, he was a very modest, low-key guy. Like, Wendy, really? Do you have to talk about me every single time? And he was just an amazing soul. He and I were a funny friendship because he was very quiet and laid back. Two words that have never been used to describe me. He was also an Orthodox, devout Jewish guy, and I'm very non-religious. And he was just an amazing soul. And, you know, there were 3,000 people who are not here, who were murdered that day because of terrorism and because of horror. And they all have a story, and they all have kind of a sphere of influence. What a lot of people don't know is about 40% of the people who died on 9/11 were never recovered. So when you see these memorials, or you see people, particularly in the New York big memorial, it's because they don't have a cemetery to go to. My friend Abe, his remains were recovered, but when I say they were recovered, my understanding from his family was it was enough to go in a handkerchief. So when they say recovered, it doesn't, they only found, I think, my numbers get screwy over the years, I bet 100 full bodies. Everything else was just enough to know that they found something. Not to get graphic, but it's important to know. It was also the largest loss of first responders, 343 firemen, 23 Port Authority police, 37 Port Authority police, 23 policemen. You know, you guys know the history, so I won't get into all of that stuff. But it's very impactful, and it's very, when you walk around the memorial, you see the names and you learn the stories. 80 countries lost people that day. The youngest victim was 2, the oldest was in their 80s. And the 2-year-old was on one of the 4 airplanes that were involved that day, on the cross-country flights. And, you know, one of the biggest pieces of 9/11 that has taught me about just when horrible things happen is the people that died on 9/11, or people like me that are survivors, I always call us regular people on a regular day. Because what happens? We turn on the news and we see, you know, a train blew up in Spain, or there was a terrorist attack in Israel, or something horrible happened in Africa, or wherever. And we feel bad, we're sympathetic, nice people, but it's disconnected. It's like it happened to those people over there. Mm-hmm. But it's not. It's regular people that you know. Mm-hmm. I just want to pause for a minute because I know I've been saying a lot. If anyone has any kind of initial questions. And one thing I should have said in the beginning that I told Terry I would say and then I forgot is people are often afraid to ask me questions because they're afraid they're going to upset me. I have heard everything from the, you know, simple to the complex. So do not worry. I'm not a historian. So if you ask me some mind-bending technical question, I may not know. I could make up the answer. But anything you want to know about me, about the experience, please feel free.
I just have a question, and
Sure.
I don't even know how to phrase it, but when you got back to your apartment and you were let in and you shut the door and you were there, it was like, did you take a shower? Did you get something to eat? Did you sleep? I
didn't sleep for about close to 3 days. I just couldn't. I became like a news junkie. The person who let me in, actually, you know, he was a nice guy, and he's like, I didn't know what to do for you, but I went to a restaurant and I bought you surf and turf. I'm like, really? I still laugh, you know, and I would say it's like such a guy thing. You know, it's just like when a woman cries and a guy doesn't know what to do. It's like, I didn't know what to do, so I bought you a steak and a lobster.
Yeah, that's good. That was good. Good move. That was nice. Oh, yeah.
And I do still laugh. It's kept me sane. So I don't laugh because I don't think any of this stuff is serious. But if you don't laugh, you'll lose your mind. So, but yeah, I mean, for the first couple days, I just was awake and just, you know, pacing. Because I worked for a health insurance company. And if you know about HIPAA and all the privacy and security on health insurance, 2001 was the forefront of that. And I was the project manager in charge of HIPAA at the time. So I was considered essential personnel. So
Sure.
within like 4 days, I had a laptop shipped to my door. And people say, well, how the hell did you work? But it actually helped me a little bit, because it's almost like now with COVID, if you're in your routine and you're doing something fairly normal, it kind of gets you out of just the swirling and chaos.
Yeah, it distracts you. It's a purpose.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yes,
Did you have debris on you? Like, how did
I
you get
did.
that off? Like what?
So when I was taken to the hospital,
Okay.
I started getting like very itchy. And what I think it is when you think of a building being pulverized, like down to powder, all like the fiberglass and all of the
Yeah.
stuff, I was very, very itchy. So when I got to the hospital, they gave me scrubs to put on. I think I still have them somewhere in some archive here. So they gave me, I took, like, they gave me towels and things to wash down. Then I had scrubs. And I did, over the time have health issues. I have an autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, which is attributed to 9/11, which is attributed to a lot of environmental exposure. And because I had asthma, I was sort of predisposed to that stuff as well. I thought I saw somebody else with a hand up.
Janet, were you
I just
wanting?
wanted to know, have you ever attended any of the memorial services? I believe they have them every year.
That's a great question. And I would love to, if they actually allowed survivors to do so. A
Oh,
little known fact outside of New York is you cannot go to the actual service unless you are a family member. And I could go as a guest of a family member with their like buddy pass tickets, and I did do that once, but I find it, and I've written to mayors and been on talk shows on this topic, that the official answer by the government of New York City and the museum and the memorial is, well, how do you prove that you're a survivor? Which for me is not hard, because I still have my ID card that says 29th floor, Tower 1. Yes, there are people that would try to get over. There's crazy people everywhere. But even if I wanted to go to the National Museum tomorrow, I would have to get in line like anybody else and pay my $30-something. And again, I know enough people in the community where I could circumvent that. But my personal feeling is one shouldn't have to sneak in. So like on the day itself, normally what I do, this year is different because of COVID, they close the memorial except to family members until about 1 p.m, and then anyone could go. But there's other stuff that goes on. Like there's a lot of firemen ceremonies. Usually on 9/11, I speak somewhere, whether it be a school or a police department or a fire department. I had COVID this year. I'm also now a COVID-19 survivor. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks and almost died in March because my lungs were compromised from 9/11. I promised Terry I wouldn't do a COVID lecture.
Oh my
But
God.
I don't want to be in large crowds. I mean, I'd like to go, I normally go to the city, but I just don't want to be among a lot of people because I'm not 100%.
really understandable. Hmm.
Wendy, I have a question. What's
sure.
the most remarkable thing that has happened to you as a result of 9/11, if you can narrow it down? I know you've done so much.
I've done a couple of things that I am incredibly grateful for. In 2014, I was invited by the European Union to go to Spain. They were doing a commemorative event for the 10-year anniversary of the bombing of the Atocha train station in Madrid, which was a terrorist attack. And what they did is they had a gathering of survivors of terrorism from all over the world. And I was there with people from any place you can imagine, from Australia to Kenya to Mumbai, India, Jordan, Israel, everywhere. And I was there representing the United States and got to meet some of the most incredible, resilient people in the world. And just to see that these people who have endured things that to me make my experience look easy, as insane as that sounds. I mean, I met one gentleman who I'm friendly with to this day. He and his wife were having a wedding in a beautiful hotel in Amman, Jordan, and a suicide bomber came in and basically half their wedding party and all their in-laws died.
Oh.
And they did an HBO documentary about him, and he can still smile and get out of bed in the morning. And it gives you, you know, people say, like, how do you go forward and how do you do anything? And I think you get your strength from connecting. The other amazing thing I did is similar. The government of Colombia had a event to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the bombing of Avianca, which was narco terrorism, you know, the narco terrorism that goes on in Colombia. And they were doing something to commemorate, and they wanted me to come and talk about 9/11 and speak to the families. And I met all the families of these people that were killed on the airplane. And I gave a speech in my really bad Spanish, and they understood me. Thank God for Google Translate. And again, just met some incredible people that we always have a joke when we meet other terrorism survivors of like, I'm glad I met you, but I wish I never met you. Because the reason I met you is because we've all experienced some form of unimaginable hell. So I know that was a long answer, Terry, but hopefully that's what you were going for.
Oh, that's great. That's super. You guys, let's give her some more questions. Who else?
Oh my gosh.
Tell us about the
I don't really have a
Go ahead.
question. Go ahead. I don't really
Go,
have a
Shannon.
question. I just have a comment. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. One thing that struck me at the beginning of your story, when it first hit and you didn't know what was going on, here you were in the middle of it, and I was in Iowa thinking the same thing. I was home, pregnant, watching it on TV, going, oh, planes don't do that on purpose. Some guy must have had a heart attack. Something. I
Yeah.
had all the excuses in the world. And then the second one hit, I'm like, oh, my world has changed. But it just struck me that I was thinking the same thing here, safe in Iowa, and you were in that building trying to get out, thinking the same thing. Like,
And I've heard that from all over. I've heard that when you were talking, Tina was talking earlier about being a docent. I'm a docent in the 9/11 Tribute Museum, which is a small museum in the city that was started before the National Museum. And I've met tourists from all over the world that say exactly that. Like, I was sitting on my couch and thinking, like, what's going on? And then the world changed. You know, I remember when I was a kid, my mother talking about that her defining moment when President Kennedy was shot.
Right.
And that was before I was born. And now, you know, it's like everyone knows where they were and what they did on 9/11.
And I remember at the time there was that big anthrax scare where
Yep.
people were getting anthrax in the mail. And
Yep.
so then when there was the terrorist attack, I thought it was like all that was all related. That was all one big thing. But in hindsight now, we know what happened. But I cannot believe at the time I can't fathom what that must have been like. Because you first hear the boom, and then, you know, you're in your office, it's your job, you're an ordinary person, it's day to day. Although I don't think you're an ordinary person, my gosh. But you know, it's just your day to day. And so you start down the stairs, and then all of a sudden it's not just some mechanical issue with, you know, the HVAC or whatever.
And people who don't know New York think, well, you know, New York is this crazy place. And, you know, I whenever I've traveled, even prior to 9/11, people are like, aren't you afraid to be from New York? I'm like, it's not any scarier than any place else if you're there. You know, there's good and bad neighborhoods everywhere. There's things that happen, you know, no matter where you're from. But I think that, like you said, you know, you're just going about your business, and it shakes your sense of security. I have PTSD. I have had it since then. It's manageable, but my friends at work even know now, if I'm at work and there's like an unexplained clap of thunder or somebody drops a loud box, I'll jump. It's just, you know, kind of who I am. I know, you know, there's different things that trigger it. My latest, you know, near-death flight with COVID. It's like, okay, you know, just all those experiences of hearing things and hearing unexpected sounds, it kind of, you know, brings it back. The only remotely positive thing about surviving something catastrophic is it makes you better at surviving other things that are catastrophic.
Yeah.
And when I talk to schools and to kids, I say, you know, do something like to make good in the world. You know, everybody says, what can one person do? I talk to kids about bullying, about just resilience, about doing something. Doesn't matter what it is. Everyone has their own cause or what they think. But there's a lot that can still be done. There's still a lot of good.
Mhm. How are you about flying on airplanes?
The first couple times I did it after 9/11, I would like look at every single human being in the area and like in my head say, and it's crazy because my first flight was a short flight. It was an hour flight. And there was a group about to board my flight, and it was the United Yemen Tourist Organization. And the person I was flying with was terrified and like, we can't get on the flight. Like there's people from the Middle East. And I'm like, no, we can't be that way. We have to just, whatever's going to be. You know, I know logically that most planes don't blow up, that most planes are not hijacked. You know, you hear all the statistics is you're more likely to get hit by a bus. I don't enjoy flying because, you know, you always think what's going to be, but I'm actually more so like that in crowded spots. Right before COVID, at the end of last year, I was in a local supermarket and I heard something and somebody said, so-and-so has a gun. They didn't have a gun. It was just somebody who was not right, who flipped over a shopping cart and just had some kind of a fit. And the sound of all the cans falling sounded like gunfire, but people were running and screaming and carrying on. And I wasn't right for a couple of days after that, just in my heart, because it's just like, you're always kind of primed for things. I look at exit signs, if I'm in a movie theater, if I'm in a mall, if I'm in a crowd, concerts. If you go to a concert sometimes where there's pyrotechnics or unexplained noises, I'm kind of always ready for that. So it's not as much for flying as it is for just life and just kind of trying to be, you know, cautious without being paranoid and with still being able to live your life.
I'm interested in, oh, sorry.
Sure.
And you're
I'm interested
muted.
in knowing kind of what it was like in the days and weeks and, you know, months afterward in New York. You know, here flags immediately sold out and everybody had one on their cars and everywhere. And, you know, then when you go outside now, you don't see that. So obviously over those 19 years, you know, much shorter time period actually than that, you know, that kind of went away. What was the, you know, things that you noticed, I guess, over the time in New York?
It was very similar here. Same thing. Flags were sold out. There was a lot of, you know, what I call, you know, brotherhood or sisterhood or people making an effort to maybe know the neighbor that they just waved to across the street before. And now they're actually saying, how are you doing and what's going on? You know, making more of that human connection, you know, raising money, taking care of somebody. If the primary breadwinner of the family was killed on 9/11, like what can we do? How can we fundraise? That kind of stuff. And then sadly, like we see with all tragedies, as time goes on, people do forget. And the part that I think is hard is, and I know now that people don't mean ill by it, but I've had so many people say, when are you going to get over it? And I used to get enraged by that. You know, my initial New York response was, so you see somebody jump out of a skyscraper and die in front of you and you let me know your timeline, get back to me. Now I'm a little nicer. I've softened with age. But I think it's, you know, life has to go on. And I get that. And people, you know, widows of 9/11 have remarried and people have done things and done commemoration, but you still have to have that kind of reverence to what it was. And a lot of times I see the 9/11 community post I wish we had the spirit of America on 9/12, to your question, you know? So, yep.
It's kind of like telling people to get over Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Yep. Well, what doesn't help either, and this is not a political statement at all, but if you Google 9/11, and particularly for people who are young and maybe weren't alive, you get conspiracy theories, you get it's a hoax, it didn't happen, the government blew up the building, there were no planes, like all kinds of just, abject insanity. So, one of the reasons that I, particularly with young people, go to schools or do any kind of talks or education is we got to bring it back to, yes, this did happen. Yes, people were involved. And, for good or for bad, this is a piece of our history, and it's not a New York thing, it's a world thing.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Actually, two questions. The first is, thank you so much for speaking. And going forward, like if you were to write a history book to carry on after you leave Earth, what would you want your point to come across as? Like
That's
what
a good
if you could put one thing in that book, what would you want it to be?
And this answer is not just about 9/11, but it's about a lot of things. Is just do what you want to do now, because it's a cliched expression that tomorrow is not promised, but things happen where we all get life in the way. Oh, I don't want to go on this dream vacation because it's frivolous. I don't want to spend money. I don't want to buy this purse because, why do I need that for? Like, I don't mean go crazy and extravagant and not pay your mortgage and go wild, but live your life and have some happiness. There's a lot of people like my parents' generation, they seem to want to deny themselves things, like I always say, like, if my mother knew how much a certain pair of shoes I have owned, she would beat me over the head with them even to this day, because she'd be like, wait, I didn't raise you to spend how much money on Ferragamo shoes? I can see it. But my thing is, should I go to the grave and pay less shoes? No. Like, you have to, you have to have some kind of something in moderation. But my message in the life would be to have some pleasure in your life. And sort of the second part is to be kind and do for others, and not be in this whole it's me, it's me, it's me. If you see somebody in the supermarket that's deciding should I get the chicken or the chopped meat because I only have money for one, give them the extra $5. Do something. We're not all rich or made of money, but you can do, or you can smile. You can say, you look like you're having a rough day. I'm thinking of you. You can just do something to make some light in the world.
Yeah. My second question is, you have gone to these memorials for other big anniversaries, and the 20th is coming up next year. What would you like to see for a day of remembrance? Is there something that hasn't been done that you'd really like to see done?
I'd really like survivors to be invited. There's that. And I will be working on that. I think that it's good to keep remembering. I think that the desire to make people not sad and to move on kind of is peppered with, not wanting to remember. But I think it's an honor when you say, yes, this person died at that point 20 years ago, but here's a little reflection of their life. A lot of times when people want to learn more, I say, go online, there's a million resources of every single person that died. Pick a name, just a random name, something that jumps out at you. Look up, so-and-so and see what they're about. Oh, they like hockey, or, they had 4 children, or they like to raise beagles, or whatever their story is. Just learn about them and honor them and kind of know who they are. I get calls sometimes from national magazines and reporters and people doing documentaries in other countries, and they say, how do we prevent these attacks, right? And I don't have the answer to that, but I think that education and power and loving one another. And I went to a women's conference one time, and it was just about having relationships with people who are different than you are, no matter if it's religion or race or whatever. And the mantra was, it's harder to hate once you know. And to just kind of go out of your comfort zone and say, oh, you know, I never knew this kind of person before, or I never met someone, or what are they like, or they have a different accent, or they're different, or whatever. Just, you know, do something and you might like it.
Anne, you've been trying to get a question in.
Oh, that's okay. It's just, I'd like to go back to right afterwards. What, you know, where did your company relocate? How did the company help the employees? How did you support each other? Also, I guess you said you're no longer with this company, so how long did you stay after that? And how did that affect maybe you? I don't know how quickly you left, but I would just like to know a little bit more about the weeks and months after.
So we had a lot of people to relocate because our headquarters were in the World Trade Center. We had about 5 offices, but the majority of people were there. So right afterwards, there was a combination. If you could possibly work from home, which was weird back in 2001, it wasn't like it is today. Some people worked from home. Some people were put up in hotels. Literally, like, not conference rooms in hotels, but like hotel rooms, which created some interesting HR issues over time of like putting people in a room with a bed and no supervision. And it just wasn't a cool corporate kind of thing. Some people, because we did a lot of work with consulting companies, they were very gracious and said, hey, come stay in our office. We also dispatched people to some of the satellite offices. So upstate New York, Albany, Long Island, people were kind of all over the place. And then in about a year or so afterwards, there was more, I'm going to call it semi-permanent locations, where they would rent different spaces throughout Manhattan. And then over years, it morphed into kind of other permanent buildings. I was with Empire until 2006. So I didn't leave because of 9/11. I just left because we were bought by WellPoint in Indiana, and I would have had to travel day and night, and it was just time. But it was a different company because some people just could not come back to the city, just mentally and emotionally. I was never like that. I always have loved New York City, and my feeling was things can happen anywhere. I mean, a plane went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a place most people never heard of until 9/11. So I never wanted to, leave. But the company did mandate counseling right away. For me, that didn't work out because I told my story at the time. All the counselors cried. Then I felt guilty because I made them cry. So then I stopped going. So you got to remember, like, the whole behavioral health industry had zero experience in terrorism in America. What they wound up doing, you might find this interesting, is they sent a lot of therapists to Israel because there was, training. There was a lot of attacks at that point. That's when a lot of buses were being bombed. So they did some of that after the fact. But right after 9/11, the closest thing they had to trauma counselors was, like, I'm going to call it normal trauma. You lost a family member in a car crash. You had some horrific thing happen, but the widespread, like, they had no idea. Did I get all your questions, Anne?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
No problem.
I sort of have a question that goes along with the counseling, and I hope
Sure.
that's a good question, but did you have, like, survivor's guilt? Because
I still do.
My personality, I mean, so many people didn't live and you did. Is that a normal thing?
It very much is. I had survivor's guilt, and in the beginning, it was very hard for me to be at events where there were families of those who died, because I decided that they hated me. Like, not because of anything they did or said, but I had just decided in the beginning that they would be looking at me saying, like, why are you alive and my son, daughter, husband, wife, whoever is not? And I kind of, when was it? It was the 5th anniversary of 9/11. I was at a memorial walk and I was talking to a woman who had lost her son. She just happened to introduce herself to me and she asked me my connection. And then she told me hers. And she said to me, I think that your life is harder than mine because you have to live with what you saw, and I'll pray for you. And I'm so glad to meet you. And I remember I broke down. I get chills thinking of it. And I realized that I was creating something that wasn't there. And I'm sure there are families that it's hard to see survivors, but this thing that I had created in my own head that all these people couldn't stand me because I lived was in my head. I still have guilt, particularly because of Abe. I feel like Abe was just such a decent, wonderful, like God-fearing, amazing, selfless person that has many characteristics that are better than how I see myself. And I wrestle deeply with why is he gone? The way that I've reconciled it a little bit over 19 years is that there's things that I'm just not meant to know. I'm not meant to know like all the secrets of the universe. So to try to make up for that, I try to do things to make some sort of difference.
I don't remember if you said how many were survivors. Did you give that?
I didn't, but there's not an exact count.
Right.
What they say is there were less people in the Trade Center that day than on a normal day for a couple of reasons. It was an election day, so a lot of people come in late. It was also the first week of school in a lot of districts, so people take off. And it was also the day after a very big football game where people call in sick. So they say that they think about 15 to 18,000 people were there. So the survival rate is actually a wonderful and miraculous thing that doesn't get enough press. You know, rightly so, the numbers of people that died is what people know and remember. But just logistically, like in my tower, the planes hit many floors above me in the 80s and 90s. So anyone above the impact died. In the South Tower, there was one staircase that was not severed. So there were some people that got out that were above the impact zone. So when you think about just the numbers of survivors, there are a lot, which is amazing. And I think that some of it, I've read some scholarly articles on this. They said that the hijackers had wanted to hit the buildings lower, because if you think about it, just like the laws of gravity, if you hit it lower, it would topple sooner and it would also kill a lot more people. But because they hit it, they were not experienced pilots. They had gone to Embry-Riddle for limited flight training. Right. Because of where they hit it, more people survived, which is definitely a blessing.
Thank you, Lord. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barb, you're muted. Let me help you. You're still muted. There we go.
Okay. Did a number of people lose their lives who weren't in the tower? I was thinking about the woman whose apartment building you went to must have been close to the towers. Did people like that also lose their lives? Was a lot of that, we talked about residential area. Is that there anymore? Was it there after 9/11? If you could talk a little bit about
Sure. That's a great question. So I know that that apartment I went to, I know that she lived because I did talk to her after the fact. The residential buildings, no one died from impact in the residential buildings. There were people that died after they got out of the tower because of falling debris, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. There are accounts of people, like one of the people that died from my building was a security guard, and he actually left and came back in to help and then died. The residential buildings where they were most impacted is a lot of those folks had to leave and live elsewhere for 3 to 6 months because either the glass was completely shattered or the amount of dust and debris was unhealthy and unsafe. I've met a woman just in my travels of being a docent who lived very close by, and she had to relocate for about 4 months because it just, even the air quality there was just insane. That's why, and I neglected to say, and I'm sure you've seen this on the news, the death counts are way higher post 9/11 because of all of the first responders that have died of 9/11 cancers and continue to. And, you know, there's Jon Stewart, the comedian, gave a whole lot of publicity to this last year when he went to Washington and got, like a lot of the first responders, benefits extended over time. So thank God they've done a lot of that stuff, but there's still a lot of people who, when they were down there, you know, they weren't properly protected. They were breathing all that in. So the counts are very, very high.
Thank you.
I
And
have
thank
a question. Oh, sorry.
Go
No, I
ahead.
just have a question about that, because I work in healthcare too. So this is probably a personal question, but like, how do insurance claim, like you developed an illness because of it, so how is your you have to pay your own copays, I'm guessing?
So I'm lucky because I work for a health insurance company. So I'm not the standard case.
Yeah.
But for people who don't, there is the 9/11 compensation fund. There's a huge hospital in New York, Mount Sinai, that has a whole 9/11 health registry that tracks people. So there is ways to do it. Unfortunately, in the beginning, for people who didn't have health insurance or had, like you say, very high copays, high deductibles, there were troubles with that stuff because that wasn't set up for a while. You know, with all the bureaucracy and the paperwork, there were people who I think didn't get care as quickly as they should have because of that. We were very lucky because I worked for the largest health insurer in New York at the time, so we didn't have any worries with that stuff. But you know, it's crazy. And even like now, I work for Blue Cross of New Jersey, and the same situation happened, but they were very quick with COVID. They waived all the copays, they waived all the deductibles because they didn't want anyone not getting treatment because of that.
So for the rest of your life, will it be waived under the 9/11 when you go?
Not through my health insurance. I have not, which my family screams at me for, I have not applied for any of the 9/11 benefits. Goes back to the question I was asked about like survivor guilt. I'm always like, let that fund be for people who need it more than I do. But I think one of these days I'm just going to put myself on the list because God forbid I was unemployed or I didn't qualify or, you know, laws happen with health insurance. You know, it's definitely something I have to do. I don't want to rely on the fact that I'm lucky that I work for a health insurer. But yeah, it's an issue because some of these things are lifetime.
Right.
You know, luckily mine's been, you know, knock on wood, okay, up until recently, but yeah. I saw somebody with a question. Somebody lit up before.
Well, I have a quick one. What was maybe the single most helpful practice or really just anything that was the most helpful for you as you just tried to emotionally get back on your feet?
You know, there's no magic bullet. For me, this helps me. This is my thing, so to speak. I like to make sure that people are remembered. I had an intern recently in my company that was assigned to me, and she was a very bright girl in her second year of college. She was 19 going on 20. And somebody had told her that I was a 9/11 survivor. So she's like, I heard this, and can I ask you a couple questions? This was last year. I said, sure. And she knew almost nothing. She didn't know there were 4 planes. She didn't know about the Pentagon. This is someone born and raised in New Jersey. Like, you can see the World Trade Center out the window of my office in Newark, New Jersey. And this is not someone raised, you know, in some, you know, backwoods place. This was an intelligent person. I think one of her parents was a doctor. I'm just like, what? And that's the kind of thing that helps me, is to say, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. This is what happened, and here's what's going on. So just doing education and awareness has helped me. One thing I will say is, I have never felt whole. I have always felt broken since then. And I've had countless well-meaning friends and family tell me that that's in my head and people don't see me like that. And I appreciate that. And it's not that I don't believe people when they say that, but you can't change how you feel inside. You know, it's like you sometimes see interviews with people who are famous for whatever they're in industry. They could be an Academy Award winner, but they don't feel it in themselves. And, you know, I get flashbacks, I have nightmares, you know, it's just, you just don't feel like you're you. And there is sometimes you lose people in your life because of that. And intellectually, that's okay, because you don't really want to have fake people in your life that can't handle who you are. But, you know, a lot of it is sort of self-awareness, and a lot of it is just saying, you know, what do you want in your life? And what helps me is just, you got to be yourself and kind of be your authentic person. And you can't just put on a happy face. Like, you know, I'm not me in September. Like, I'm definitely, and people who know me know that. But it's some days it's better than others. That's the only thing I can really say.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Sure.
Wow. You know, I get a little monthly, or a little news article. It's called Guidepost. And they, in the beginning, they had so many good stories about 9/11 and survivor stories and ones that the family told about it. But I, to my recollection, don't recall that I've seen any articles. And I'm thinking I should write a letter and ask if they couldn't at least annually, you know, put this remembrance back up and share a story.
That's awesome. And anything I can do to help. I mean, if you know, I do not, one thing that people do, and it's their thing, it's not mine. I don't charge anyone for anything. I know people that, you know, will not go talk anywhere without a fee, and I think that's insane. Like, I'll talk to anyone of any size or any crowd. So if you know of, you know, churches, schools, synagogues, anybody in the world who wants to do anything 9/11, kids doing book reports, feel free.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, if you can help anyone understand, I feel like if someone puts a face to living history, I think about when I was a kid and I had to sit through social studies and learn about things that happened in, you know, 1785, and I was like, oh God, is it lunchtime yet? But if you saw an actual human being, I equate it to, I've met Holocaust survivors over the years who were children, or maybe they knew from their parents what happened, and it really brings it to life when there's a face and a human being next to it.
Yeah. I was a sixth grade classroom teacher at the time of the incident, and I can remember, what can we do? What can we do? And our team had the kids, we got ribbons, and we made ribbons, and we collected, I can't even remember now how much. This was obviously 19 years ago, but
Sure.
It was so meaningful. The students were just so into it. And that was a little of our way. But when it happened, our principal said, no TV on, nothing, because he had a fear that some of the students in our school of 700 could have family that was at the World Trade. And so they would have been really upset by it. So he asked that we don't share anything at the time.
Your school was smart, because I have family in Michigan, and I have cousins that are much younger than I, who at the time were like 10, 12, and 14. and their teacher said, oh, look, this is unfolding right in front of us. Let's put
Yeah.
live TV on. And my cousin was laying on the floor because they were all excited and proud. Like, cousin Wendy works in the World Trade Center. They always knew it. They were excited. They loved all things New York. And they were like screaming watching this on TV. And my uncle like went in and said to the
Yeah.
principal, like, same thing. Like, everyone has, it's a global world. Everyone knows people in other states and other countries. And
Yeah.
even now, when I talk to schools, I'll say to the principal or the teachers, is there anyone who has a personal affiliation? Because it's very real. Like, some kids, even if they weren't born, they grew up knowing, like, my aunt died in the World Trade Center. So you
Right.
have to, go in knowing that stuff.
We had kids at our school and their dad was on the plane in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
But with kids, I was in first grade at the time, and the next morning we had a little boy that came to school and he said 25 planes ran into buildings in
Yeah.
New York City because he had watched it continuously, and every time
Oh.
he thought it was another one and another building and another. So you really have to be careful.
people have asked me, like, should I tell my kid about 9/11 and how old should they be? And I always preface that answer with, I'm not a child psychologist, and I can only speak for myself, but my experience is that kids know so much more about it than you think. I addressed a school and the kids were between 8 and 12 years old, and the principal wanted me to talk about 9/11 and not use the word terrorism, which is challenging, but I said, I'll figure out a way to do that. So I sanitized this as much as I could. And then when we got to the Q&A, first kid raised her hand and said, so what nationality were the terrorists? Did you see your friends on fire? Did you see anybody jump? I've seen pictures of the jumpers. And I'm like, I looked at the principal like, okay, now what? Because you can't lie to them. You can't change the subject. So it's hard. And I guess, parents must struggle with that with any kind of large news event. Just how much to tell,
One of my sons, when he studied U.S. history, they had to interview a World War II survivor, somebody that had fought in the World War. And he learned so much from that assignment. And they're having a hard time doing that now because there's not enough survivors. So I think they need to start interviewing 9/11 survivors.
Some
Because
schools
it does
do.
put that face.
I've had requests from I think the youngest one I had was 5th grade. I get a lot of, like high school, but even as in 5th grade, they do it. And what's crazy is in New York City, there is no mandate to teach 9/11 in schools. I had a lovely conversation with Mayor de Blasio on that topic. And I said, I don't want to hear about budgets because there's people like me that'll do it for free. Like, this is not a costly thing. You can make the curriculum. I mean, there's organizations like the ones I volunteer for where there's people that are just ready to do it. And some schools don't want to do it. Some high schools shy away. They don't want to upset. It's strange.
I would love to. I will probably recommend, because the team that I taught with are still there teaching. And I'm going to suggest that maybe even for next year or at any point, that you speak to them. I think it would be very, very valuable.
I appreciate that. And I can absolutely tailor, there's many things that I don't say and different ways that I say things depending on the audience. Even when I was first speaking with Terry, I said, are there going to be kids? Like, what are the ages and all of that good stuff. And I also know when kids get into dangerous topics like, nationalities and other things, and does this have to do with religion, how to kind of steer that back to, out of controversial zones.
Heidi, I know you've been trying to get a question in.
Well, I just would like to ask Wendy, how do you feel if you have to whitewash we know it was terrorism. How do you whitewash that?
I don't have a great poker face. They don't make them on New Yorkers very often. And I, you know, it's one thing for me if it's for children. Like, I'm not going to get into, you know, sounds of people jumping and dying in front of me with 8-year-olds on a call.
No.
But one of the things that bothers me is when people say, oh, you know, why in this book or why in the National Museum do they have graphic pictures? I'm like, because it's a graphic event, you know, and my thing is kind of like, do you want to know what happened or don't you? If you want to know what happened, this is not a Disneyland experience. You know, you can't, you know, I remember growing up and we had a family member that, like, they wouldn't say the word cancer. It was like a whisper, cancer, you know, like it's not, if you say it low, it doesn't mean they don't have it. Like it's hard. You know, my thing is, if somebody asks me to address something or speak, I'm grateful for the opportunity and I'll do it as much as they can, but I try as much to say, like, you know, let's try to get something out of it, because I don't want someone to leave with a different impression of really the meat of what happened. I don't want to give people nightmares. You know, I do tours at the site where I walk around the perimeter and I tell my personal story, and I've had people weep and cry, and I don't like people to cry, but it's not a feel-good kind of a thing. You know, and I try just to, you know, interject some humor here and there, because I don't want to break people's hearts. And, but I want people to understand the severity of it, and that it did happen, and that how many people's lives are affected. I mean, you think of when one person dies that we know, the people they work with, their friends, their family, their circle, their coworkers, and you multiply that by 3,000 people on 9/11, and then the thousands of people who have passed from 9/11 illnesses. I get alerts on my phone every time somebody dies from a 9/11 cancer. It's like I feel like I can't unsubscribe to them because it would be disrespectful, but it's like, it's painful. But yeah, whitewashing is hard. It really is.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I can't believe it, but we have been on this call for an hour and 20 minutes. And I feel like it's probably time for us to start wrapping it up, but gosh, I don't want anybody to miss out on a question. So last call.
Just a quick statement.
Sure.
Whenever I put myself back in that time, I was a young mom, and I would watch TV and see stuff that would be going on about international stuff, and I just didn't care. Like, I don't care about Israel. I don't care about, you know, anything. And then this happened, and the sense of patriotism and pride of the United States, I've never felt that until then. Like, who we are, and what is it, Lee Greenwood song, "Proud to be American."
Yes.
I hear the radio, your chest gets big. You're like, oh, you know, just how we responded. Anybody else feel that way?
That song still makes me cry, by the way. Ever since that song still gets me.
Yeah.
There's certain things.
But if I heard it on September 1st, it would just be a song. September 12th, it's my national anthem.
And keep that. That's the kind of stuff that you got to keep, because if you do, then it's not all for nothing.
Well, and I think the world just changed. 9/11 changed the world forever. I mean, safety, we realized we weren't safe, and we always believed we were on the continent, you know, and all the changes in travel and all the changes in defenses, overseas situations. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's just a much, I mean, it's just a whole, you know, I think all of us in the back of our minds realize that the vulnerability of the United States is there, you know, and even though we would like to think not, you know, it affected all of us in different ways, but it continues to affect us, which, you know, hopefully we've learned and grown, but it's still, the world is still an evil, you know, there's lots of evil still in the world, unfortunately. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I have I have a grandson whose birthday is tomorrow.
Wow.
And 13, he's going to be 13. So he was born after 9/11. But I always, and my daughter was born on Pearl Harbor. So 2 defining moments in history for sure.
And tell your grandson to celebrate. I have a friend who has a wedding anniversary on 9/11 and another who has a birthday. And both of them in the beginning are like, we feel guilty having a good time. And I said, no, I want you to have twice as much a good time in honor of those who can't. There's no point in holding back, like the question I was asked before. You know, there should be no guilt or don't have a good time. It doesn't help anyone not to have fun, and it honors them that did. There was a lot of fun-loving, happy people that died on 9/11. So celebrate extra tomorrow.
Okay, I'll tell him. Thanks.
That's a nice way to look at it.
Wendy, this has really been special. So thank you so much for your time. You've just been a dream to work with,
Oh,
and
thank
we're
you.
just so privileged to get to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. And if anyone needs to get in touch with me, Terry has my email and my contact information. Don't hesitate. You were all a pleasure. I'm grateful that I got to virtually meet everyone. It's nice to see actual faces. You gave me an excuse to put makeup on and not be in sweats.
Thank you for Terry for setting this up. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
No, this
Yeah.
has been great.
Thank you so
Thanks, you
much.
guys, for joining in. And
Thank
Wendy, let's
you.
keep in
Bye-bye.
touch.
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.